My name's Shane, and I'm 37. For the past 4 years, I've been married to Felicia, the woman I once thought was my soulmate. I say once because, well, that belief shattered during what should have been one of the happiest times of our lives. We were on vacation in Thailand, celebrating our anniversary, a milestone that in retrospect feels like a cruel joke. That trip was supposed to be about rekindling our connection, but instead, it was the beginning of the end. And, oddly enough, it all started with a Thai massage. Felicia had always been the kind of woman who carried herself with effortless grace. She was confident, radiant, and had this way of making every room she walked into feel a little brighter. I admired her figure more than I could put into words. She took care of herself, not in an obsessive, over-the-top way, but enough to make me look at her and feel like the luckiest man alive. Our intimate life reflected that too. She had this way of touching me, of knowing exactly how to make me feel wanted. It wasn't just about the physical connection. It was how she made me feel like I was the center of her world. At least, that's how it used to be. We landed in Phuket, buzzing with excitement. Everything about the place screamed paradise. The golden beaches, the crystal-clear waters, the warm breeze that felt like a gentle embrace. We spent the first few days exploring, lounging by the sea, and indulging in the kind of carefree intimacy that vacations often bring. She would laugh as the waves crashed around her body glistening under the sun, and I couldn't help but think, this is what happiness looks like. Then, on the third day, Felicia suggested we try a Thai massage. I wasn't particularly keen on the idea, but she was enthusiastic, so I went along with it. She signed us up for separate sessions at a spa she'd read rave reviews about. "Trust me," she said with that playful glint in her eyes that I loved. "This will change your life." As I lay there during my session, the masseuse worked out knots I didn't even know I had. It was relaxing, sure, but my mind kept wandering back to Felicia. I imagined her in the next room, her body surrendering to the rhythmic pressure of the massage. I thought about how beautiful she was, how much I enjoyed touching her, being with her. Even in that moment of supposed relaxation, all I could think about was her. When we met up afterward, Felicia's face was flushed, her eyes brighter than I'd seen in a long time. She looked different, happier maybe. She couldn't stop raving about how incredible the experience was, how the masseur had magic hands that seemed to know exactly where to press, how to release every ounce of tension she'd been holding. I chuckled at her enthusiasm, glad she'd enjoyed herself. But something shifted after that day. At first it was subtle. She started pulling away in ways that were hard to pinpoint, but impossible to ignore. When we were intimate, it felt like she was somewhere else, her mind drifting to places I couldn't follow. She no longer caressed me the way she used to, with that slow, deliberate tenderness that made me feel like I was the only man who existed for her. Her touch became mechanical, distant, as though she were going through the motions. And I began to notice it wasn't just in bed. It was in the little things, too. The way she laughed at my jokes felt forced, and the way she looked at me lacked the warmth that used to make me feel invincible. I tried to push the thoughts away, convincing myself I was imagining things. Maybe she was just tired from the trip. Maybe the vacation hadn't been as relaxing for her as it had been for me. But deep down, I knew something was different, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the massage had something to do with it. It's funny how certain moments in life can become these turning points, these forks in the road where everything that happens afterward seems to trace back to that one event. For us, it was that massage. I didn't know it at the time, but it set off a chain reaction that would unravel everything we'd built together. Felicia couldn't stop talking about it. She described in vivid detail how the masseur's strong hands seemed to read her body like a map, finding every hidden ache and relieving it with expert precision. Her voice brimmed with excitement, her eyes lighting up as she recounted the experience. She was animated in a way I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. And as much as I wanted to be happy for her, something about the way she spoke unsettled me. I didn't know it yet, but she was building up to something that would break us. Later that evening, she called me to sit down for a talk. My stomach twisted in knots as she started to speak, her words careful, but her tone heavy. And just like that, our marriage began to crumble. But I'll get to that in a bit. For now, just know that moment, that conversation, changed everything. The first crack in the foundation came not through some dramatic revelation, but from a memory, an innocuous moment that had slipped past me unnoticed, only to resurface days later with startling clarity. It was the kind of detail you might overlook in the haze of a vacation, where the mind is too busy soaking in sunsets and cocktails to latch onto every little thing. But once it resurfaced, it took root and refused to let go. After Felicia's massage, when we returned to our room, I remembered her slipping something into the pocket of her robe as we walked inside. I didn't think much of it at the time. It looked like a small, white piece of cloth, and I assumed it was a napkin or towel from the spa. She'd clutched it tightly, almost absent-mindedly, before disappearing into the bathroom. It was such a fleeting moment that I dismissed it completely. Later that evening, something fell off. I couldn't shake the image of Felicia during the massage. She'd been so radiant, so utterly in her element. When she returned to the room, her cheeks were flushed, her hair slightly mussed, and her skin seemed to glow as though she'd just stepped out of a dream. She looked intoxicating, the kind of woman who could make you forget about the rest of the world. I'd felt an overwhelming urge to be close to her, to claim her in the way only a husband should. But when I suggested we turn in early and spend some time alone, she hesitated. She mentioned being tired and wanted to shower first. While it wasn't a flat-out rejection, it was enough to make me feel the sting of her distance. Her touch, when she finally joined me in bed, felt indifferent, and the intimacy I craved seemed just out of reach. It was a subtle shift, but I could feel her pulling away. That's when the memory of the cloth crept back into my mind. Something about it didn't sit right, and my thoughts began to spiral. The next morning, as Felicia slept, I wandered into the bathroom and noticed the laundry box in the corner. On top of the pile was her white swimsuit, the one she'd worn to the massage. The lower half lay there, but the top was nowhere to be found. My chest tightened as realization dawned on me. The cloth she'd slipped into her robe pocket wasn't a napkin. It was part of her swimsuit. She'd returned to the room holding it in her hand, which meant she hadn't been wearing it during the massage. My mind raced, piecing together the implications. Why would she remove it? Why had she clutched it so tightly, as though she didn't want me to see it? As much as I tried to push the thoughts away, they consumed me. I couldn't shake the image of her lying on that massage table, her bare skin exposed, her body vulnerable under the hands of a stranger. The thought of someone else touching her, seeing her in a way that was meant only for me, filled me with a mix of anger and despair. I decided I needed answers. I went back to the spa under the pretense of inquiring about another appointment. My heart pounded as I approached the massage room, unsure of what I was hoping to find. The door was slightly ajar, and as I stepped inside, my breath caught in my throat. There, hanging over the back of a chair, was the top of a white swimsuit. It was identical to the one Felicia had worn. I couldn't prove it was hers, but deep down I knew. It was too much of a coincidence. My blood boiled as I glanced around the room, hoping to confront the masseur, but he was nowhere to be found. Frustrated and filled with a sickening mix of dread and rage, I stormed back to our room. When I returned, I kept my suspicions to myself, though the thoughts haunted me. As soon as Felicia was about to start talking, my anger boiled over. I asked her where the top of her white swimsuit was, my voice sharper than I intended. Felicia seemed startled by the question and responded casually that it was in the laundry box, as though it were the most normal thing in the world. This response only fueled my frustration. I countered her claim, stating that only the bottoms were there and informing her that the top was hanging in the massage room. I demanded an explanation. Her expression changed as the calmness she had maintained began to crack under the weight of my accusation. She struggled to find the right words, opening and closing her mouth before finally sighing deeply. Her shoulders slumped as she admitted that this was the very thing she had been planning to discuss with me. And with that, the dam broke. When Felicia started speaking, I could hear a calmness in her voice, but it was layered with hesitation, as if she was carefully choosing her words. She told me that ever since the massage, she had been thinking deeply about herself and our marriage. During those moments on the table, she said her mind had wandered under the touch of the masseur, and she had begun to consider ideas she had never entertained before. One thought in particular had taken root, the idea of an open marriage. She explained that the thought hadn't been intentional. It had come to her suddenly, almost like a revelation. She said she had started wondering if exploring connections outside of our marriage could help her grow as a person. Her belief was that this personal growth might ultimately make her a better partner for me. Her tone was careful, as though she were trying to frame the idea as something positive for both of us. But her words felt like daggers. Her words hit me like a tidal wave. As I sat there listening, it felt as though the ground beneath me was crumbling away. She insisted that her desire to explore herself wasn't a rejection of our love, but a step toward personal and emotional development. She claimed she wanted to become the best version of herself, and to do that, she needed the freedom to experience things outside of the confines of our marriage. She even asked me for time. A few months, she said, to think through the idea, assuring me that she still envisioned a future with me, albeit one that now looked very different. I struggled to comprehend what I was hearing. This was the woman I had celebrated our anniversary with just days ago, the woman I had built my life around. How could she suggest something that so blatantly disregarded the promises we had made to each other? Her words sounded alien, like they were coming from someone I didn't know. Amid my swirling emotions, one question pushed itself to the forefront. I couldn't hold back any longer and asked why the top of her swimsuit was left in the massage room. Her response came with a strange and disconcerting frankness. She admitted that she had cheated. She said it so plainly, as though the act itself wasn't as important as what it had led her to realize. She described the experience as an awakening, a moment that had unlocked something within her, something she hadn't known was there. It was this moment, she explained, that had sparked her thoughts about an open marriage. Hearing her admit to cheating felt like the air had been knocked from my lungs. I couldn't reconcile the woman sitting across from me with the one I had loved so deeply. I asked her how she could betray me like this, and what kind of justification she could possibly offer. She didn't try to excuse it. Instead, she described the incident as a catalyst for her self-discovery, framing it as a step toward understanding what she truly wanted in life. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. The walls seemed to close in around me, and the air felt stifling. Without a word, I left, wandering aimlessly through the dimly lit streets of the resort town. My mind was a storm of emotions: anger, sadness, confusion. I questioned everything: my love for Felicia, the foundation of our relationship, even my own sense of self. How had it come to this? Had I failed her in some way? Had I missed something along the way? By the time the first light of dawn broke, I had made up my mind. I couldn't accept what Felicia was proposing. The idea of an open marriage, of sharing her with someone else, went against everything I believed in. It wasn't just about the betrayal or the act of infidelity. It was about trust, respect, and the shared values that had been the cornerstone of our relationship. I knew I couldn't live in a marriage where those values no longer existed. When I returned to the room, Felicia was still awake, waiting for me. Her face looked tired, etched with worry and regret. She tried once more to explain her feelings, pointing out what she believed to be my own unmet needs in the relationship. She suggested that exploring other relationships could ultimately strengthen our bond, giving us both the space to grow as individuals while still remaining committed to one another. But I couldn't listen to her anymore. I told her, as plainly as I could, that her vision of our future wasn't something I could accept. To me, love was about exclusivity and giving oneself fully to another person. What she was proposing felt like the opposite of that. I explained that while I still loved her, I couldn't live in a marriage that compromised my values and my sense of self-worth. Felicia seemed disappointed by my response, but not entirely surprised. She quietly agreed that we should cut the vacation short and return home. The tension between us was palpable as we packed our bags, each movement weighed down by the silence that filled the room. The flight home was quiet. I felt a deep sadness, but also a sense of clarity. I didn't know what the future held, but I was certain of one thing. I couldn't continue in a marriage where the fundamental rules had so drastically changed. Yet, something happened on that flight, something unexpected. It was a small moment, but it later brought me an odd sense of comfort and shifted my perspective in a way I hadn't anticipated. When we returned home, Felicia suggested that she temporarily stay with her friend Alice to give herself space to process everything. She said she needed clarity, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that the distance was as much for me as it was for her. I agreed without argument, knowing I needed time as well. The days following her departure were quiet, almost unnervingly so. For the first time in years, I was alone in our house, surrounded by reminders of the life we had built together, a life that now felt irreparably fractured. I began setting emotional boundaries, not for her, but for myself. The idea of reconciliation felt impossible. Our visions of marriage had diverged too drastically. I found myself replaying her words, her explanations, her justifications. At first, they made me angry. How could she see betrayal as self-discovery? But anger soon gave way to sadness, an aching void that left me questioning whether I had ever truly known her at all. The shock and betrayal had left me raw, but as the days turned into weeks, I started to process everything more clearly. The initial fury I felt gave way to a quieter sorrow. I grieved not only for the loss of our marriage, but for the trust that had been so thoroughly shattered. There were moments when I thought back to our happiest times together, laughing over dinner, holding hands during long walks, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her dreams. Those memories were painful now, tainted by what had happened. Acceptance came slowly, like the gradual lifting of a fog. I realized that clinging to what we had, or what I thought we had, would only prolong the hurt. Felicia's choices had revealed a part of her I hadn't seen before, a part that didn't align with the person I wanted to spend my life with. I began to understand that moving on wasn't just an option, it was a necessity. Oddly enough, clarity came from an unexpected source. On the flight home, I had met Nikki, a fellow traveler who had been seated next to me. Initially, we exchanged polite conversation about our respective vacations, but as the hours passed, I found myself opening up to her. Nikki had an easy way about her, a natural empathy that made it easy to talk. She mentioned that she, too, was grappling with betrayal, though the details of her story were different. In the weeks after Felicia left, Nikki and I stayed in touch. Our conversations became a lifeline for me. She listened without judgment as I poured out my confusion and pain, offering perspectives that I hadn't considered. Nikki's own experiences had given her a hard-earned wisdom, and she helped me see that standing up for my values wasn't just about principle. It was about self-respect. She reminded me that compromise in a relationship should never come at the expense of one's core beliefs. Our friendship deepened over time. It wasn't romantic, not then at least, but it was profound. Nikki had a way of bringing humor and lightness into conversations that could have easily been weighed down by despair. She became a source of solace, a reminder that life could and would go on. Eventually, I knew what I needed to do. The love I had for Felicia hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something bittersweet, laced with the knowledge that our marriage had reached its end. I initiated divorce proceedings, a decision that felt both heartbreaking and liberating. It wasn't an easy step, but it was the right one. Felicia didn't contest the divorce, though her reaction was muted. She seemed resigned, almost indifferent, which only solidified my belief that we were beyond repair. A few weeks later, I learned through mutual acquaintances that Felicia had begun seeing someone else, a revelation that stung, even though I knew it shouldn't. Her delay in telling me about this new relationship felt like yet another betrayal, a confirmation that our paths had diverged in ways that couldn't be reconciled. As I worked through the legal and emotional aspects of ending my marriage, I found myself relying more and more on the support of those around me, especially Nikki. Her honesty and strength inspired me to look beyond the pain and focus on what lay ahead. She reminded me that life wasn't just about surviving heartbreak. It was about finding new reasons to hope, new ways to grow. The house, once a shrine to memories of Felicia, began to feel like mine again. I rearranged furniture, painted walls, and filled the space with things that brought me joy. Each change felt symbolic, a step toward reclaiming my sense of self. The day the divorce was finalized felt surreal. It wasn't the closure I had imagined, nor the heartbreak I had once feared. Instead, it felt like a quiet acknowledgement of something that had already ended long ago. The weight I had been carrying, the hurt, the anger, the sadness, had begun to lift, leaving space for something I hadn't felt in a long time: possibility. With the support of Nikki and a determination to reclaim my life, I began to focus on rebuilding. It started small. I returned to old hobbies I had neglected during the chaos of my marriage: writing, running, and cooking meals that were just for me. Each act, no matter how mundane, felt like a step toward rediscovering who I was outside of being Felicia's husband. Nikki became a constant source of encouragement, pushing me to see beyond my pain. She challenged me to focus not on what I had lost, but on what I could gain. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the memories of my marriage would sneak up on me, happy moments that felt tainted by betrayal. But slowly, those memories began to lose their power. They became part of my story, not the definition of it. I started therapy, something I had resisted in the early days after the breakup. Talking to someone helped me make sense of my emotions, to untangle the guilt and resentment I had carried. I began to see the divorce not as a failure, but as an opportunity to grow. It taught me the importance of self-worth, boundaries, and the need for honest communication in a relationship. Through this process, I realized that I had spent so much of my marriage trying to be the partner Felicia needed that I had lost sight of what I needed. Her actions, painful as they were, forced me to confront that truth. I had to learn to prioritize myself, to understand that a healthy relationship requires mutual respect and shared values. As I moved forward, I made a conscious decision to focus on building a life rooted in authenticity and purpose. I wanted to create a future where I could thrive, regardless of whether I was in a relationship or not. Nikki, who had become one of my closest friends, continued to inspire me. Her own journey of healing mirrored mine in many ways, and together, we found strength in our shared experiences. I didn't rush into dating. The idea of starting over felt daunting, but I knew I needed to take the time to heal fully before inviting someone new into my life. Instead, I poured my energy into things that brought me joy: traveling, pursuing career goals, and deepening connections with friends and family. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living for myself. Looking back, the entire experience taught me lessons I hadn't expected. I learned the importance of self-awareness, of knowing who I am and what I need in a relationship. I realized that love isn't just about compromise. It's about ensuring that your compromises don't erode your core values. Trust is fragile, and once it's broken, it's almost impossible to rebuild. But perhaps the most important lesson was this: sometimes letting go is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. My advice is simple: take the time to heal. Don't rush to fix things or find someone new. Focus on yourself, on what makes you happy and fulfilled. Surround yourself with people who support you and challenge you to grow. And most importantly, don't settle for anything less than the love and respect you deserve. What's the most important lesson you've learned from a challenging relationship, and how did it help you move forward? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts.